Hey guys, Elizabeth, the curly-haired country gal here, and I've been trying out some low-maintenance systems for watering and protecting my new budding food forest. Watering it has been with water right hoses, and protection has been with Premier One electric fencing. I'd love to show you what I've been doing. Let's do this thing. So I first heard about this idea of food forest several years ago from James Prigioni, and I was inspired. So now, 3 years later, we're out on our homestead and it's finally time to get it going. So I'm working toward this big goal of raising 100% of our own food so that we can have better than organic produce and pasture-raised meat. So far, I've got this bed, which is about 53 feet long and 5.5 feet wide. It's 5.5 feet wide because I went ahead and purchased some of the polypropylene ground cover that was recommended by Living Traditions Homestead to keep the weeds out. I ended up not using it this year, but I'm confident that I will in the future. So out of those two systems, watering and protection, watering by far is going the best. As I mentioned, I went ahead and purchased some water right hoses. Now on their website they say that they're American made, so I'm confirming with them now via email to make sure that they're all American made and not just some of them. But I ended up getting two 75-foot soaker hoses, a 75-foot hose, and two 25-foot hoses, and I'll show you how I'm using those. They have different diameters and different colors. I believe these are 1/2-inch diameter. Now these hoses are not cheap, but they are really well made, and again, we like to support businesses that are here in the US and that make things here in the US. So here's our house, and here is the orchard. And where I'm going to be starting from is where this little arrow is here. That's where the spigot is. This whole thing has also been an experiment to make sure that we have enough water pressure to make sure that we can get water going that far. Because from that spigot up into the orchard where there's more splits and longer hoses, it's about 200 feet to get up there, and it's a little bit uphill. So that's been an interesting experiment. And spoiler alert, so far we have had enough water pressure, so I'll talk more about that toward the end of the video. So meanwhile, my kids were playing in the stock tank turned pool, which they've been enjoying when it's not green and nasty. But I went ahead and turned off the spigot and went up into the food forest. So right about here is where I needed to make my first connection. Now, some of the water right hoses have stainless steel fittings and some of them do not. So my husband definitely opts for the stainless steel. I got that for most of these, but one of them wasn't available, so I went for the not stainless steel. And while I was working on that, Miss Dinkins wanted to have a snuggle, so that was nice. She comes up and torments the chickens every once in a while in the orchard. So up at the top of the food forest, a little bit farther up, is where I put in this brass hose Y with shutoff valves. So long name, it's just a Y and it has shutoff valves. But this is where the first split was. Then I ended up putting a second brass hose Y with shutoff valves off of one of those, and I'll show you how that all works. But we're gonna, for now, follow this first hose to the food forest, and that's walking down hills just a little ways to where that arrow is pointing. And then just past that is where the rabbitry is. And I was about to head that direction when all of a sudden this rainstorm hit, but it's all good. So later that afternoon, I went ahead and followed that hose down to the food forest. And along the way I stopped and admired the peaches that are growing, because this is our first year where we're hoping to actually harvest some peaches. So down at the bed, I went ahead and put in another brass Y. Cut with scissors the ties off of the soaker hose instead of the knife like I was about to start with, and then I thought, oh, that's a bad idea. But then I put another brass Y in here so that I could run one hose on one side of the bed and one hose on the other, and so I carefully threaded it down the length of the bed. There were already some things growing. There's strawberries on the one side, and then there's a variety of things on the other side. So I went ahead and ran that down carefully. Now there is a fair amount of excess, because like I mentioned, the bed's only about 53 feet long now, and the soaker hose is 75 feet. So that's going to be extra that I can use to stretch across the rest of the way when I expand this bed. And then for weeding, I went ahead and followed Charles Dowding's suggestion of getting this weed remover. And the idea is that it kind of teases the weeds before they get very big and you don't have to do a lot of weeding by hand. You just kind of tease them up and then they end up dying. And so that has been working really well when I've used it. So I have to kind of work it into my routine to do that more often, because some of the weeds got pretty big and it ended up not being as helpful, but that's the idea that I'm going for with that. And at this point, I thought that I was done. I thought, okay, great, I got these Ys, I got it hooked up, I'm done. But then I remembered that I had these timers back from when we were still living in town. So then I was tinkering with that for a while, and to my surprise, it has been 2.5, 3 years since I used these, and the battery was still working. So that was great. But this thing is pretty nifty, so I don't know if they still make them today. I'm assuming they do. But there's this knob where you can indicate the start time, and there are 2 stations. That's the plugs where the water comes out of, and then there's 3 options for when to have the water start, and you can set that, and you can decide how much water, how often, turn it off. The auto turns it on, and then of course you can set the clock, and this larger square in the middle shows how long until the next time it's going to start, and then it alternates between that and what time it is. So this is pretty slick, and it's been working great. So I remember that I had that, so I went ahead and unscrewed the Y that I had put on and screwed that on. So following the hose back up to the compost, there's a 25-foot hose that's coming off of the second Y, and that's just for filling up the chicken water as needed or miscellaneous needs. And then this other split actually goes to another timer, same type of timer, where I'm watering the compost. Yes, I'm watering my compost just to keep it moist. I have it hooked up to a sprinkler, and I have this timer set for, I think, 5:30 in the morning for half an hour, and that seems to be working well. And then I have the timer for the compost also set for, I think, 25 or 30 minutes on days when it's really hot, and there's a rain delay option on the timer as well, which is really convenient. So then it was time to go ahead and actually try it out. So I went back to the food forest after turning everything on, and the soaker hoses are working great. And it's been a few weeks now, and they are continuing to work great. So this is a system I'm extremely happy with. And then back up at the top, this timer was kind of leaking. I realized it was pouring out of both spouts, so that took a little bit of shifting around, but quickly got that figured out. Then was testing out this last hose, turned on that valve, and voila. So this is making watering the food forest super easy, and the system's working great. This water pump that we have that my husband changed is working great. He had to get that fixed pretty swiftly after we got back from a trip in December when our water pump wasn't working. So you can check out the video for that. Hey you, if you're enjoying this video, can you like it down below? Thanks! I checked back with the system a couple weeks later, and I was very excited to see some strawberries growing, but I was not very excited to see that something else was enjoying the strawberries as well. That kind of leads me to some of the disappointment or frustration that I've had with the Premier One fencing. The one that I got was advertised to keep out rabbits, to keep in chickens, to keep out deer, and basically it hasn't been doing any of that so far. My chickens hop out, the rabbits from the neighborhood jump in, and deer have jumped in as well. So I'm brainstorming some ways to kind of work around that, and just today I finished one alteration to the fence, which I think is going to help a lot, but I wanted to figure out a way to protect this investment that I'm making of trying to raise my own food. So I do have this other chicken fence from Premier One, and right now it crosses the food forest and runs down along the other Premier One fence and behind the rabbitry, which in this video is still in the works, but is now complete, which the video for that is going to be coming out very soon. So I decided to go ahead and try encircling the raised bed with this fence to see if that would keep the rabbits out. So I started by string trimming around the whole bed, and then at that point I decided that I wanted to go ahead and lay cardboard down just to see if that would make my life easier as far as mowing and string trimming and not having to move the fence as much to mow. And the result of that is that overall I'm glad I did it, but the cardboard's pretty stiff now. So I mean, it would be better to actually put a weed barrier or some sort of black plastic down, but I think overall it worked pretty well to have that, and I'm glad that I took the time to do it. So then one other note that I realized as I did this was you have to keep in mind the dimensions of your fence as you work, because this fence, I believe, stakes are every 10 feet. So I laid a row of cardboard first, and then I realized it was off by a couple, a foot and a half. So I had to go back and move all those. So you can keep that in mind if you are trying to copy this idea. When I was just about done, I must have pulled on something too hard, and I went ahead and broke the connector. So, just be careful with wires as you're working. And I found a lovely ant colony just hanging out on the battery. I kind of have a track record these days of disturbing ant colonies. I've been doing that quite a bit. Anyway, I was able to strip the wire and get that hooked back up so that it was running correctly. Then I also ran this grounding wire and went ahead and turned it on after leveling things a little bit. So after all was said and done, my daughter wanted to show off her roosters. This one's either Cargo or Trickster. I mix up which ones they are, but she's really good at catching them. And of course, it wasn't 5 minutes after I finished this fence that this one silly little chicken decided that she wanted to climb underneath the cardboard. This chicken in particular really likes to just snuggle and burrow underneath things. So I had to kind of discourage her a little bit from that. And there's just a whole bunch of fun adventures here. In the meantime, in the blink of an eye, my kids had caught dozens of tadpoles, which I wanted them to return after a few days because I knew that they couldn't keep tadpoles alive, but they have a lot of fun. So the result of having this fence around the perimeter of the raised bed, the food forest, hasn't been great. I think the rabbits were still getting in, and as a matter of fact, my chickens were jumping in once things started growing and I had these big pumpkin leaves, and they were laying their eggs underneath the pumpkin leaves, which I wasn't super thrilled with. But I think that was mainly user error, because as you can kind of see from this clip here, it's not super taut, and I didn't secure the corners to make it really tight. So I think if I had done that, things would have been a lot better. And I didn't do that. So I'm gonna, even though I've been a little bit unhappy with the Premier fences overall, I'm gonna chalk that up to user error and say that I could have done things differently to protect it better. But I'm gonna be changing this up in the future soon anyway, actually just in the next few days. I'm gonna go ahead and divide across the whole orchard again from Premier 1 to Premier 1 fence as it had been, because it's just about time for me to start expanding into that other 20 feet or so of space underneath another tree to expand the food forest for next year. And by the way, I forgot to mention that this food forest where I'm growing things, you can check out the video where I was planting everything. This is all in 100% homemade compost. Only compost that I made here, which is really exciting, and it has been extremely economical. So you can check that out as well. So there you have it. I have this budding food forest that I'm watering automatically, so it takes zero effort during the day, and trying to protect with this Premier 1 fence that is working okay, but might just be my fault. So thanks so much for joining me. And pretty soon there's going to be more changes and more expansion. So if you're enjoying this, go ahead and subscribe and see how I'm going to continue to make this really economical food forest thrive. We'll see you next time.